Thank you, Pierce. That was an interesting comment and point in history. I was contacted by Lindelen, and appreciate your introduction to President, in September, and gladly said yes to the invitation. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. While we're getting this up, I might remind you that for your investors, an ounce of gold was $35.
At Parkland Memorial Hospital in Dallas. You have vivid memories of the president on the operating table. Dr. Ronald Jones, one of the first doctors to see the president at Parkland Hospital, worked on Kennedy in the trauma room, was then chief president of surgery. He was 31 years old at the time. 2 days later, he treated Lee Harvey Oswald. He's now chief of surgery at Baylor University Medical Center in Dallas. So what were you doing at the moment you heard?
That was the 40th anniversary on Larry King. I was seated in the cafeteria at Parkland Hospital and had just finished a vascular procedure and was there with Dr. Malcolm Perry, who was one of the junior faculty. And the operator began to page Dr. Tom Shire's stat. He was chief of surgery. It means respond immediately. Dr. Kemp Clark, chief of neurosurgery, respond immediately. And in those days, as you mentioned, we didn't have beepers or cell phones, strictly an overhead page system. And I got up and went to the wall and answered the phone, called the operator and said, why are you paging everyone's stat? And she said, Dr. Jones, the president's been shot and they're bringing him to the emergency room, and they need physicians right away. And just completing my 7th year of residency after medical school, that was a tremendous impact starting that weekend. I turned around, and immediately behind me was Dr. Pepper Jenkins, who was chief of anesthesia, and Audrey Bell, who was the OR supervisor. And I walked over to the table and I said, the president's been shot and they're bringing him here. And Dr. Jenkins said, I'll get an anesthesia machine down from the operating room. And Ms. Bell said, I'll get the operating room ready. Because we thought that he had probably been shot with a pistol, perhaps in a crowd, and we would take him to surgery and repair his injuries and he would be okay. This is a picture of Parkland I took shortly after that, and the top 3 floors had not yet been completed. I went back to Dr. Perry and told him what had happened. By then, people are standing up in the cafeteria looking at us. They knew something terrible had happened, and we exited the back of the cafeteria, ran down the hall, down the steps, into the emergency room on the ground floor, and I entered trauma room 1. This is a picture of it that I had taken just a few weeks after the assassination, and the president was on this cart. Trauma room 2, the door was closed, and I didn't know that anyone was in there. It turned out Governor Connolly had been taken there. The president was out on the cart with his arms out on arm boards, and Dr. Carrico, who was the 2nd-year resident in surgery, was attempting to put an endotracheal tube, a tube in the windpipe. And the president, as I looked at him, was motionless. I never saw any evidence of life. His eyes were open. He was staring. However, Dr. Carrico had thought he had seen some agonal respirations, and that's what triggered his part of the resuscitation. I saw a entrance wound that I thought was an entrance wound right in the midline of the neck, just above the thigh, and I described it later as being about 1/4 of an inch. In retrospect, he was shot with a 6.5 millimeter bullet. It's 25 millimeters in an inch. 6.5 and a 25 comes out pretty close to 1/4 of an inch. I knew he had a large wound in the back of his head. There was blood on the cart, but we didn't pay a lot of attention to that because we needed to get an airway and an IV going. Dr. Perry started a tracheotomy in the event that Dr. Carrico was not successful in the intubation, and I wanted to do a cut down. Two other physicians in there had been unable to start an IV because the veins were collapsed. So I took a pair of scissors and cut up his shirt and his coat and found a vein up in the upper part of his arm. By that time, I was trying to get to this cabinet over here to get some venesection tray, and the room had filled. This is a room that's about 12 by 16. And by then there were probably as many as 20 doctors, paramedical people, and nurses in that room. So a nurse handed me one of these trays overhead. This is an autopsy picture, but it's pretty much the way I saw the president and recall it. If you look right here at the bottom of this incision, this is a tracheotomy incision that Dr. Perry made. You see this little cutout part? That's the bottom part of the wound in his neck from the missile. And you'll notice that his hair is pretty much intact. There's some skull perhaps hanging out here. I don't recall that, but I was on the lower part of the left arm and was not privy to the right side of the head as such as I was standing there. But you can see the scalp is pretty much intact, and you'll see some later pictures of him, and you'll notice that the face is intact. This is just a parting of the hair. For the first 24 hours, we all thought this was an entrance wound and an exit wound in the back. This is a picture of his coat, as I described, that I cut up and across the chest. Those times, the IV bottles and the blood bottles were glass. They're plastic now. But as soon as I isolated the vein, which took less than a minute, I couldn't get the gloves, so I did it barehanded. I put a little polyethylene catheter in that vein and hooked a bottle of Ringer's lactate, which is this solution, the clear bottle right here up. Dr. Carrico had heard or read that the president might have Addison's disease, and that's a deficiency in stress that could cause a decrease in cortisone, and so he gave him 300 milligrams IV of hydrocortisone after we had the IV started. This is just a picture of the chest tube tray that we used to insert that tube. And as Pierce has said, he was coming down the motorcade from Love Field, waving to everyone. Connolly is in front, and the crowd is cheering. You can see the number of people. There are tens of thousands of people. They're not only on the street, but they are up here in the balcony areas of stores, and they're 10, 20 people deep. He came down Main Street and crossed Houston, and the 6th floor depository is right here, and he came down Elm Street. This is the grassy knoll. I'll show you the picture of the Zapruder film in just a second, but as you see, these are slides from that, and you'll see he's going behind this sign, and when he comes up, what Pierce described of his arms coming up. This is a reflex action. Not only had he been shot in the throat, however, that's close to the spinal cord, and that's a reflex action bringing your arms up. If you see people come in with a high cervical fracture, often their arms will be across their chest. So he's been hit the first time here. And you'll notice how close Mrs. Kennedy's head is to his. And then Connolly has turned around, but as you'll see in the Zapruder film, he's beginning to fall back at this point, although he denied till the end that he was hit by the first bullet. Now he's been struck in the head with the second bullet. So there's been 2 hits. Connolly has already fallen back to Natalie's arms, and this is Mr. Zapruder on the right, and he is describing what he saw. This is a slow motion blow up. Here's the sign. Arms go up. Second hit. There she's picking up what Pierce described as the skull. Mr. Greer's accelerating, heels on the back. This is the couple you described as on the grassy knoll. Policemen are beginning to look up at the 6th floor. Mr. Brennan, as he described, had thought he had seen somebody at the 6th floor window. They entered the 6th floor school book depository, and on the 2nd floor was a lunchroom. And in the lunchroom, they noticed a gentleman that had been previously described as being perhaps weighing about 130 pounds, maybe 30 years old, 165 pounds, maybe 30 years old, which was not too far from his age, which was 24. And he was getting a Coke out of the Coke machine. And so Patrolman Baker asked him to come over and to talk to him. But Superintendent Truly said, it's okay, he works here, and they let him go. That was about 2 minutes after the shots were fired. At 3 minutes, he's seen walking out of the school book depository with a Coke in his hand. The police go and make their way on up. In the meantime, Oswald has gotten on the bus and has made his way east of the school book depository, gets on the bus. It's not traveling very fast, so he gets off after about a couple of blocks. In 3 or 4 minutes, Mrs. Bledsoe, from whom he had rented a room earlier in the month for about a week, recognized him. And he got off and went to a Greyhound station area and picked up a taxi and was dropped off in about the 700 block of Beckley. He lived in the 10,000 block of North Beckley. This is his rooming house at the time, and he picked up a sweater that the landlady maid saw, and whether he picked up the pistol there or not remains to be seen. I want to back up here just a minute and see if we can. There's some slides that are left out, I think, but well, maybe not. Here is the J.D. Tippett's his patrol car, and by then there's been a request for all the personnel in the school book depository to come down to the lunchroom. All of them came except one, and that was Oswald. And when he was not there, they put out a bulletin with his description. This was broadcast throughout Dallas, and Mr. Tippett picked up on that, and he's in Oak Cliff. There's a gentleman or a man running down not running, but walking briskly, nervously down the sidewalk, and so he matches the description. He calls him to come over to the patrol car. Oswald comes toward him, and as Mr. Tippett, Patrolman Tippett, comes around the front of the car, Oswald pulls his pistol and shoots him 4 times. He kills him almost instantly, and he empties his pistol, the cartridges, throws them in the bushes nearby. They are later found and determined to be the ones that came from that pistol. This pistol was bought from Seaport Traders out of Los Angeles at a price of $29.95 in March of that year. And this map was published in the Dallas Morning News about 2000, year 2000. And here you see where Oswald's rooming house was. This is where the theater is. This is where Tippett shot Oswald shot Patrolman Tippett. And this is Jack Ruby's apartment at 223 Ewing, South Ewing. I just thought that was interesting. There's never been much made out of that. Coincidental, it's said. That supposedly Oswald never had any relationship or knowledge about Ruby prior to the assassination. This is the area where Oswald was arrested. He ran down to the theater and ran in a shoe store nearby because by then someone had reported that a patrolman had been shot and killed. And so other patrolmen rapidly came to that area. They were going up and down the street with their sirens on. Oswald enters the shoe store. The manager notices that he's very nervous. He doesn't ask anything about shoes, and he turns his back to the window as the patrolmen are going by. As soon as they pass, he runs out of that and runs into this theater and passes the ticket counter, does not purchase a ticket. The manager thought he was suspicious enough, and with all that was going on, that he told the cashier, and they decided to call the police. They called the police came and decided, after talking to the manager, that they would position themselves in the back of the theater and put some up at the screen. And when they were in position, they asked the manager to turn the lights on. There were only about 7 or 8 people in the theater at the time. Oswald was one of them. He stood up, walked about 3 rows back, and sat down. This is a picture of Paul Bentley, who made the arrest, and Oswald hit him, but Bentley struck him back, and Oswald pulled his pistol in an attempt to shoot him, and he grabbed his pistol, prevented it from firing, and arrested him. Now, this is about 1:50 p.m. Kennedy was shot, President Kennedy, at 12:30. So within an hour and 20 minutes, they had captured Oswald, took him, handcuffed him, and took him down to the city jail at about 2 o'clock. Mr. Bentley died in 2008. This is a mugshot. When asked what happened to his forehead, he said the police did it. In the meantime, President Johnson is sworn in as the 36th President of the United States by Judge Sarah Hughes, Lady Bird and Mrs. Kennedy watching. Back at the school book depository, these are the slides I was really looking for, they noticed the boxes in front of the window. And they went behind the boxes and had a pretty good view of Elm Street, and the window being up, thought that this was likely the location. And they found the 3 cartridges that you alluded to on the floor, and they are circled, the 3 shots that were presumably fired. Nearby, hidden in those boxes, was the Italian used rifle, 6.5 millimeter. And this is the obituary for Carl Day, who had the rifle and took it in. There were no fingerprints externally on the rifle, but if you remove this grip, there were Oswald's fingerprints under the lower side of the barrel. This is a picture of the rifle. It was purchased for $12.75 with a coupon from the American Rifle Association magazine. And he bought a 4-power scope for $5 and something, and the whole thing with the shipping charges was about $21. Here's a picture which he denied was either someone had put a head on someone else's body, or they had superimposed the rifle and pistol on this picture, but Marina says that she took that in the spring after he had purchased those weapons. Ms. Kennedy is on the airplane. The airplane was delayed a little bit, Air Force One, from leaving Dallas because they wanted to swear in the president, but they wanted him out of here fairly quickly, but she didn't want to leave until the casket with Kennedy's body was on board. Even when they took off, they weren't sure where they were going to take him, to Walter Reed or Bethesda, and Ms. Kennedy said because he was a Navy man, she wanted him taken to Bethesda Naval Hospital, which is where they did take him for the autopsy. He's landed here. She's coming out of a cargo area as they remove the casket from Air Force One. That afternoon, this was the paper that I bought, and showing that President was dead, Connally had been hit, and the other thing was that paper cost 5 cents. He is handcuffed here and goes back and forth for interrogation 8 different times. So he's passing up and down this aisle in the jail in front of the newsmen. The newsmen it was pretty loose. They were allowed to be right where he was, and he would be taken back and forth, and Captain Fritz and several of them would interrogate him. That evening at about 11:50, they charged him with the murder of Patrolman Tippit. And on one something, in early Saturday morning, they charged him with the assassination of President Kennedy. In this group, and the press was allowed to ask him questions, right here with the horn-rimmed glasses is Jack Rubenstein. Jack Rubenstein frequented the police area. He was known to the policemen. He came and went as pleased, and so they didn't think much of him being there the night before. Connally had been shot, but he had been taken to surgery by Dr. Shaw. And this is a picture of his chest x-ray, which was published in a book that we published on trauma in general, but I know that this was his chest x-ray, and this shows the injury to the right chest. He was shot right about the nipple line, 5th rib. Also, this is a 6 months follow-up film. He's also shot in the right wrist, fracturing it, and a fragment in the left thigh. So he was sitting with his right wrist across his left thigh when the shot was fired. The next morning, this was the headlines of the Dallas Morning News, and they described Oswald as a pro-communist, charged. This was a piece that I was supposed to write the next morning as to what we did or during that time, and so I didn't see it for several years. It had been turned over to Secret Service or the Warren Commission. It's labeled top secret. And in it, this was the next morning now, still did not know what the autopsy showed. I just said that Dr. Perry and I went to the emergency room, found him to be dying. I thought Dr. Clark, the chief of neurosurgery, would describe the skull and the brain injury. I just said there's a small hole in the front midline of the neck, thought to be a bullet entrance wound. And then went on to describe that Dr. Perry did the tracheotomy and I did the cut down and put in the chest tubes. This is his jacket, and we didn't know he'd been shot in the back. We didn't turn him over. Ms. Kennedy was at the right of the room as I walked in, trauma room 1. She was very composed. I didn't see any emotion at that time. We never saw her shed a tear. And my impression was that she knew that this was a possibility. It had happened, but she was composed the times that I saw her. She left the room periodically to get in the hall, but most of the time I thought was in the room as we were attempting resuscitation, which was pretty gross as far as a family would be concerned, doing a tracheotomy and chest tubes and so forth. This is so we didn't turn him over after he was dead. I had completed the trach, and he had completed the trach, and I'd performed the cut down and inserted the chest tubes. We got a heart tracing in the machine in the OR, and in the emergency room OR, and it just showed a straight line. He had no evidence of any heart activity. And so about that time, Mrs. Kennedy passed word to us that she didn't want him pronounced until a priest arrived. And the priest had not arrived at that point. We did a little bit of closed chest massage, Dr. Perry did. I pulled his trousers down and tried to feel a pulse in the groin, and he had an ace bandage wrapped around his abdomen and down one leg, and that was holding his back brace in place. At that point, I decided to leave the room, and when I walked outside, one of the gentlemen walked up to me with a huge badge in his right hand, and he said, "I'm with the FBI, and I need to call J. Edgar Hoover and tell him the condition of the president." And right behind him was another gentleman from Secret Service, and he said, "I'm with the Secret Service, and I need to call Joseph Kennedy and tell him the condition of his son." That was a huge hit emotionally, and you knew that he was going to be told that his son was dead. Ms. Kennedy had said she didn't want him pronounced. Plus, I didn't necessarily want to be the one that would say it, just like you said, Pierce. And I thought, what if he happened to be resuscitated? Because I didn't know exactly how bad this head injury was. And so I just said he wasn't doing well. And subsequently, someone said they heard the FBI call J. Edgar Hoover and tell them that he was not doing well, although he was dead at the time. The next morning, the Commander Hume called Dr. Perry and said, "We can't put this autopsy together. He's been shot in the back, but we do not see anything of an exit wound. And he's been shot in the head, but we don't find a bullet." And Dr. Perry said, "Well, I made the incision in the hole, and so I cut right through that, and there's a wound there." And they said, "Okay, then this is an exit wound and not an entrance wound." That was the thought at that point in time. Now, this is his jacket, and he's been, the hole in the back of the suit is about 5 3/4 inches below the collar. And the forensic scientist, in order to support this as an entrance wound rather than an exit wound, say the fabric fibers are going in, down in this area. And if you look at the front where the shirt is, there's a hole right here where these arrows are, and they match up. And here's the nick in the tie, and those fabric pieces are going out. So the forensic pathologist said this is an entrance wound back here, an exit wound here. Now, I think this is a fake photo. This, as you saw, what I showed you to begin with was what we saw, and that's not what I know it's not what we saw. And I showed you his hairline, and you can see that that's different. So I think this is an altered photo that somebody has published but is not true. This is what we saw, and you can see the difference, and you see this hairline is intact here. This is what we thought was an entrance wound down here, and in fact, it's now thought to be an exit wound. I thought his face was relaxed when I first looked at him, and you can see the fractures in his skull, and that would account for that. This is Commander Hume and Boswell, who assisted him with the autopsy. I thought Commander Hume was fairly old at the time, but he was 38. Here he is later, published an article in the AMA and said that no one attempted to alter their findings, no one coaxed them to say something that was not true, and Commander Humes died in 1999 at the age of 74 from lung cancer. Saturday morning, after the autopsy, the president's placed in the East Room. This is the Sunday Oklahoman saying Oswald's the killer and the case is cinched. And we know that that's not exactly true to this day, but presumably is. On Sunday morning, I was on call, and Oswald had been published in the paper, would be moved somewhere around 10:30 or 11 a.m. They were going to